Contrary to popular belief, there are more than two comic book publishers in the world, but the two biggest are DC and Marvel Comics. Growing up, I started with DC Comics. It wasn't until years later that I got into the Marvel Comics. I liked them too, and maybe it's just the nostalgia of youth, but for some reason, the DC Comics characters hold more resonance for me. They seem more primal. They seem more essence of comic book superheroes. They just seem more iconic to me. But while Warner Brothers sat on their hands about what to do with the DC Comics properties that they owned, Marvel built an amazing film franchise, and they did it by translating what they had done for years in comics, a shared universe of comic book titles, and then they translated that into film. It is an achievement of cinema that no one has ever tried before, and Marvel has pulled it off to spectacular results, both culturally and financially. So when Warner Brothers saw the money that Marvel was making, they wanted in. They wanted their own cinematic universe. So did Sony and Fox too, by the way, but that's another story. And besides, they only had the characters that they were lucky enough to license from Marvel before Marvel Studios existed. But Warner Brothers had the characters. They had the original superheroes: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, The Flash, the Justice League. They had decades of stories to draw from. So they started with Green Lantern. Not a bad choice, but they forgot what makes Green Lantern Green Lantern. Now, if you knew nothing about the Green Lantern comic strip, but wanted me to pitch it to you, I would describe it as superhero meets Star Wars. His adventures are spacebound and not earthbound. But I guess Warner Brothers was afraid that if you didn't keep the film earthbound, it wouldn't appeal to a mass audience. So they only introduced the cosmic elements of the series and then did nothing with them in order to keep the story focused on Earth. Because, Star Wars has never gone over with the general public in a big way. The film didn't do what they wanted, so they got cold feet and started over. So they did Man of Steel. I watched it once and had extremely mixed feelings about it. I won't get into any of that now because it would take too much time. But I will say that it played a lot better for me the second time. And while it was a very divisive movie with the general public, I will give credit for one thing. And that's for having the balls to separate themselves from Marvel by giving Man of Steel a heightened, serious, melodramatic tone that the Marvel films didn't have. Although while I am giving credit, I'm not sure that that credit necessarily goes to Warner Brothers. This is just my own personal feeling, but I'm not sure that Warner Brothers was even conscious that this was going on, because this kind of tone doesn't always play well with large general audiences. And when you invest big money into a film franchise like this, you want to appeal to that large general audience first, not the smaller audience that this kind of tone is going to play to. Now, it was announced that there would be a second Man of Steel film to follow this one. But I'm guessing that while Man of Steel was in production, they saw the money that the Avengers made, and it's obvious that the WB just got greedy and impatient. They wanted a shortcut to Marvel's Avengers movie money, and that shortcut was Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. But they also paid a price for that shortcut, and that price was Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Even before it came out, I thought, this is a stupid title. Just call it Dawn of Justice. We know who Superman and Batman are. We aren't stupid. But the trailers were intriguing. So when I went to go see it on opening weekend, there had already been an enormous amount of bad reviews. After seeing it for the first time, my first thought was, well, I thought there was no way that Superman could have flown with that kryptonite spear. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I added that this movie was good for a rush job, because I knew that Warner had rushed the development of this franchise in their hurry to get to Justice League. But I didn't think it was as bad as critics were saying. I even made a short video with myself and my friends reacting to it right after we got out of the theater, something I have lived to regret, because then I saw it a second time. And then I saw what a mess the movie was. You see, my brain played a trick on me. This film borrows bits and pieces from a number of already published Batman and Superman stories. And I have read so many Batman and Superman stories over my lifetime that my brain was able to fill in details about character motivation and plot holes that the film wasn't explaining to the rest of the world that hadn't read these stories. On the second viewing, I could see all the plot holes. I could see all the inconsistencies. So when this 3-hour director's cut was announced, I held little hope that making it longer could improve on the mess that the theatrical version was. But it does improve it. Somewhat. If I break up the film's 3-hour running time into 3 acts, I would say that the first 2 acts benefit the most from this director's cut. What was going on in Africa and how it affected the public's view of Superman makes more sense and helps to lead into a much smoother transition into the whole "must there be a Superman" theme that followed. And when I watched this part of the movie, I realized that this is probably what the second Man of Steel film was going to be about. And if it wasn't, then it should have made for a much more focused second film in the franchise. In Man of Steel, a lot of fans complained that this version of Superman was not their Superman. But I counter that argument by saying that in Man of Steel, he was still learning how to be the Superman that we all know now. Had the second film taken the "must there be a Superman" theme as the focus for a solo Superman story, it would have been a great springboard to bring this film version of the character into the Superman that he is supposed to be. Why Batman is colder and crueler at the beginning of this film is better explained with just a few moments of footage in this ultimate cut. Also, more scenes of Clark Kent investigating the Batman in Gotham City better help to develop why Clark Kent is concerned about Batman, and I understand why Superman would suddenly just show up and rip up the Batmobile. Now, unlike some fans, I never had any problem with how this portrayal of Lex Luthor was different. I was always okay with it. I just didn't like not understanding what he was trying to do. In the theatrical cut, the more you thought about it, the more it didn't make a whole lot of sense. There was always a sense that Luthor was manipulating things behind the curtain, but in this film, we get a much clearer idea of how he was manipulating things. One of the most important scenes to me happens after the Capitol building blows up. In the theatrical version, it appears that Superman just leaves right after the destruction. It's no wonder audiences didn't like this version of Superman. In this director's version, we see Superman trying to save people after the blast. We witness the care and sadness he feels for them, and that he feels guilty for not spotting the bomb. Only after he's done trying to help rescue the victims does he leave. So many fans rightly exclaimed that Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder do not get Superman. But this one scene could have gone a long way in showing that they do get him. Also, in this new cut, we get to understand why Superman couldn't detect the bomb. After watching the theatrical version, I kept wondering, is Batman stupid? Doesn't he read about how many lives Superman saves? But in this version, it also explains why both characters come off as morally ambiguous to the other. There are some things that still don't make sense to me in the first 2 acts. I still don't understand why Perry White thinks it's more important that Clark follow a local sports hero story rather than investigating a controversial vigilante in Gotham, as if that wouldn't sell papers. But these smaller flaws go down easier because the bigger character stuff plays out much smoother and clearer in this new version. And the film even feels like it could be a classic until we get to the third act. Now, I will say that the third act does play out smoother from all these extra scenes because we feel more invested in the characters now. But these improvements don't fix the fact that the whole title fight, that is the selling point of this film, still makes very little sense. If Batman wants to kill Superman, why does he create kryptonite gas grenades when he can simply just create kryptonite bullets? Lex tells Superman that if he doesn't go after Batman, that he will kill his mother. Superman takes off to go after Batman. Why doesn't he immediately start scanning the area with his supervision and start looking for his mother? Earlier in the film, he flew from Metropolis to Mexico in seconds to save a young girl. While Lex is thinking that he's off to fight Batman, he could probably find and save his mother at super speed before Lex even knew what happened. When he confronts Batman, Superman makes one attempt to try and talk some sense into Batman before he begins to further antagonize him and knock him around. Not a good way to get him to see reason. Earlier, Superman tore up the Batmobile. Why doesn't he just tear open Batman's armor and fly him up into the air and force him to listen? Just like in the theatrical version, the characters become stupid so that we can have the fight that the movie is hell-bent on giving us. And this extended version doesn't fix this. And it still makes no sense that Superman can fly with that kryptonite spear, when earlier he couldn't even swim with it. Now, there is one criticism that I want to address from the theatrical version. Everyone and their mother complained about the Martha moment. Everyone equated it to, oh, your mother's name is Martha? So is mine. Let's be friends. But I never saw it that way. In this version of the film, we get a much better sense of how Batman has grown so intensely obsessed by his paranoia of Superman. I saw the mention of Martha as something that made Batman take pause, something that reminded him of why he became Batman, something that cleared away the fog of paranoia he had developed. And it gave Lois Lane enough time to explain that Lex Luthor had been manipulating them both all along. The majority of that explanation happens after we cut away, but we don't need to hear it all because in this new version, we've seen it all beforehand. And when we come back, Lois has just finished explaining everything. As Batman leaves to save Martha Kent, there is a new scene where he admits to Alfred that he's been the horse's ass. It goes a long way to letting us see the journey that Batman has made from paranoid fanatic to reasonable human being. And this film does use Batman to make a commentary on how good men can become cruel, paranoid, and irrational under the right circumstances, but that it is still possible to right the ship that is your personal psyche and become reasonable again. After the theatrical release, there were a lot of complaints about how unclear Lex's motivations for hating Superman were. In this new version, we are given better reasons for why Lex hates Superman so much. But let me tell you something about hatred. When you stand for something, anything, people will hate you, no matter what that stand is. Lex hates Superman because what Superman stands for contradicts his core beliefs about man and God. And when your core belief system is contradicted, most people will become defensive and go to any length to deny it, and will begin to hate the source of that contradiction rather than consider that maybe they may have been wrong about something. It's just human nature. I'm sure there are going to be a few people who will hate me for making this video. And let me tell you something else about hate. It isn't rational. I have had people hate me. Their reasons for hating me generally make no sense to me because their reasons are something they have manufactured about me that oftentimes has no basis in any kind of truth or reality. But they believe it, and there is little or nothing I can do to talk reason into them because they have decided that their belief is the truth, and there is no way that they can be wrong about this. So Lex's irrational hatred makes sense to me because his hate is coming from a very irrational place of denial. Batman, on the other hand, is coming from a place of paranoia and fear that there are forces, like Superman, that he can't control. But eventually, he sees reason, and he has an arc at the end of the film after he realizes that he was wrong, and instead of being afraid of Superman, he is now inspired by Superman to find a higher calling, to help bring together other superhumans to help defend the helpless. He decides to become a better and not bitter version of Batman, and that is why he doesn't brand Luthor in his confrontation with him at the film's ending. While the details are never given, I am going to assume that the government covers up that they had anything to do with the making of the Doomsday Menace, and they are complicit since they allowed Lex Luthor access. I'm also going to assume that they covered up that they were okay with nuking Superman in order to stop the Doomsday Menace by officially honoring Superman as a hero after his death, which he does deserve. But I'm sure that the government endorses this largely to cover up their own sins in the matter. Now, even with these improvements, there are a lot of dramatic conveniences, like Bruce Wayne seeing the final message from his fallen employee just as the Capitol building blows up. But you know what? Those conveniences are not as apparent if you are more invested in the characters. And if there is one improvement that this new version of Batman v Superman gives me, is that I have found myself more invested in the characters. The third act is still problematic, but I can deal with it better with this new version. Prior to this, I never had any desire to ever rewatch the theatrical release again, and I still don't, except as an object of analytical study on how wrongly you can edit a movie. But I would rewatch this extended cut for enjoyment. This new version is not perfect, of course, but it is a far better film than what the studio released. The theatrical release did not perform as well as they expected, but I think the studio would have made more money if they had released this version in theaters instead. And this film still suffers from the greed and impatience of Warner Brothers. There should have been a second Superman film, then a Batman film, to help better develop these characters for us before we got to this film. Right now, this film is only available for digital purchase. It will come out on DVD and Blu-ray in a couple more weeks. If you plan on buying it digitally, I recommend you buy it at iTunes, since it will come with the iTunes Extras, which appears to be all of the bonus features that will be included when you buy it on DVD and Blu-ray. As near as I can tell, the Amazon digital version is just the movie with no extras. You know, I always disliked the big cheat at the end of the original 1970s Superman movie starring Christopher Reeves. And for a long time, it soured me on rewatching it. But as the years have gone by, I learned to love the rest of the film so much that I learned to just overlook the cheat at the end and love the rest of it. I'm not saying that this film is now as good as that one, but who knows? In time, I might grow to like the first two halves of this film enough that I'm better able to set aside my reaction to the third act of the film. In closing, I will say that I do feel sorry for director Zack Snyder. He took such a raking over the coals on this film after it came out, and it wasn't really his version of the film. In this way, life has imitated art, as Zack Snyder has been as persecuted as Superman was in the film he directed. This is TJR. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.